on on camera.
I'm on camera. Okay. Well, let's read some poetry. I've been reading out of the Fife, Austin and Alta Fife's Ballads of the Great West. This book, I'm just reading them in sequence, 3 or 4 a month, whatever time permits. And I don't remember what I read last time. I think I read this one. So this is called On Salt Plains, and the little introduction says, malign nature, as in nature, Mother Nature, and enraged Indians give no quarter whatsoever to 2 unfortunate teamsters. The result, a prairie burial. The author is Daisy Lemon Cold Iron, which is from a book, Ballads of the Plains, published in Dallas by Kaleidoscope Press in 1950. And that's I'll read this poem. Go gather a load of the white, white salt, 2 cowboys all alone. For the salt lies wide and the salt lies free on the dry earth bed of an ancient sea, there by the Cimarron. Oh, is it the salt in your eyes, poor boys, for the wild winds blow and blow? Or is it salt tears in your eyes, poor boys, not tears for you could not know? The cattle herds wait for the white, white salt. 2 mothers wait for their boys. Your shovel and spade will dig a lone grave in the dry joint clay where wire grasses wave, while the sailing buzzards pose. Oh, the flint-sharp darts in your hearts, brave hearts. 4 arrows in poor Bristow's. In Fred Clark's body 4 more so sharp, and the long wind blows and blows. Oh, who was to warn you? Who was to tell? Your wagon wheels, did they moan? Dull Knife and his band have escaped from the fort, but there is no messenger bearing report. To you, 2 teamsters alone. Comrades, ease you down in the clay, red clay, where the crisping wiregrass grows, praying, God, take care of these 2 poor boys, where the strong wind blows and blows. Okay, this is piece number 9. It's called Geronimo. The storied Apache chief is viewed with fear, awe, and admiration. It was written by Ernest McGaffey. He published a book called it was published in a book called The American Anthology, sometime between 1787 and 1900. I don't know exactly when it was published. Anyway, this is a short poem about Geronimo. For those interested in Geronimo, I do sell a video that Rudy Ramos put on here in Winnsboro, a one-man show called Geronimo Life on the Reservation. It's an excellent video of his performance, and it's available only at the Emporium in Winnsboro. Beside that tent and under guard, in majesty alone he stands, as some chained eagle, broken-winged, with eyes that gleam like smoldering brands, a savage face streaked o'er with paint, and coal-black hair in unkempt mane. Thin, cruel lips set rigidly, a red Apache Tamerlane. As restless as the desert winds, yet here he stands like cavern stone, his raven locks by breezes moved, and backward o'er his shoulders blown. Silent, yet watchful as he waits, robed in his strange, barbaric guise, while here and there go searchingly the cat-like wanderings of his eyes. The eagle feather on his head is dull with many a bloody stain, while darkly on his lowering brow forever rests the mark of Cain. Have you but seen a tiger caged and sullen through his barrier's glare? Mark well his human prototype, the fierce Apache fettered there. Now this is called Indian Legend of the Cavern. Now the introduction reads, a whole generation of Americans pulsed with wonder at the reading, recitation, or memorization of this synthetic and highly literate legend of the Colorado River Canyon, said to have been written by Jeremiah Mahoney and published in Barnes' Fifth Reader in 1884. The Indian is noble, idolized even by the Anglo-American, but only from the moment he is no longer a threat. This is Indian Legend of the Canyon, and it refers to the canyon as the Colorado River Canyon. Where the sunset's golden gleamings on the rocky highlands rest, 'neath the moonlit silver beamings of the distant dreamy west. Once there roamed an Indian lover with his fawn-eyed Indian fair, lover blithe as mountain rover, maiden rich in flowing hair. But the sleep that knows no walking chilled the gentle maiden's breast, and the brave, all hope forsaking, laid her in the hill to rest. Laid her where the eye may wander, far o'er slopes and legends steep, and the mind on billows ponder, billows grand but locked in sleep. Then the brave's bold eye was darkened, and his hand forgot the bow. Naught to human speech he hearkened, naught but sorrow would he know. Frozen was his heart of gladness, as the summits capped with snow, dark his soul with sullen sadness, as their cavern depths below. But the great good spirit sought him in his speechless grief, and in kindly promise brought him matchless comfort and relief. Come, he said, and see thy dearest, see her in her spirit home. Towards the southland, 'tis the nearest, we shall journey hither come. And they went, the spirit leading, speeding with unmeasured force, neither hill nor valley heeding. On, straight onward was their course. With the whirlwind's footstep striding by the smooth and rock-cut ledge, hills the earthquakes plowing, plow dividing, plowshare sharp as lightning's edge. Such their way through hill and valley, cold and narrow, dark and steep, opened the rock-embosomed alley, cut 1,000 fathoms deep, carving, piercing, cutting, thorough, toward the drowsy southern shore. The spirit formed the mystic furrow, and told its sides to meet no more. But the spirit good, all-knowing, feared lest men's unresting race, by the mystic pathway going, should mar the spirit hunter's chase. 'Twas then he gave the torrent's headway, 1,000 streams were poured. 'Twas then adown its narrow bedway that first the Colorado roared. And still the diamond drops are speeding down 1,000,000 rippling rills, the headlong rushing cascades feeding from liquid hoard of snow-clad hills. And still the voices of the river within the canyon's depths are heard, in echoing sounds to speak forever at the bidding of his word. Okay, how are we doing on time? I don't want to take too much time here. 6:30. Since there are so many readers here, I will read 2 more, and then I will call it quits. The 11th one is called Dust or Bust. The introduction. of this one. This is the kind of tale you might have gotten straight off the cuff from the puncher whose foot was next to yours on the rail at the bar. A tale about a tough but not too bright hombre who pushed his luck once too often and got his due. Dust or bust. Bandana Jack was in Mexico and staying there for his health, but he got in a game with Six-Card Joe, who coppered Bandana's wealth. So Bandana started north once more to try another stack, and he picked on a bank in Salvador to get him his lost stake back. He managed the job as a one-man show with a gun at the cashier's head, who handled the money way too slow, so Bandana left him dead. A posse trailed him for nigh a week, but he lost them without a fight. Then he reached an arroyo near Sandy Creek and holed up there all night. After shifting and cinching the money load, he rode his pinto down for more than a mile on the dusty road to a quiet mining town. Jack hadn't been eaten for quite a spell, while the posse was on his track, so he piled in grub at the Grand Hotel and fed his horse at the back. When he comes to pay for the grud and feed, he was feeling as if he'd bust, but there on the boss's desk he seed a good-sized bag of dust. He shoots the boss, and he grabs the bag, and he gallops away from the camp. He forgets that he's riding a worn-out nag till it drops right down with a cramp. He packs himself with a golden gun and starts on foot with a load. He travels along, half walk, half run. Then the posse comes up the road. They meet him there in the rocks and sand with a shower of red-hot lead, and the gold bags slip from Bandana's hand as he sinks by a sand hill, dead. And this last one is called Billy the Kid. And the intro is several ballads which have circulated in popular tradition concerning Billy the Kid treat him as an unredeemed criminal, as done the one given here, as an underdog gone wrong and hence deserving of pity, or else as a hero in full possession of most of the virtues ascribed to cowboys and to Westerners generally. Anyway, this is a short one. Billy was a bad man and carried a big gun. He was always after greasers and kept them on the run. He shot one every morning for to make his morning meal, and let a white man sass him. He was sure to feel his steel. He kept folks in hot water, and he stole from many a stage, and when he was full of liquor, he was always in a rage. But one day he met a man who was a whole lot badder, and now he's dead, and we ain't none the sadder. That's enough for this month. I will now pass the buck to Mr. Jodan Boyd.
Okay. You want to sit here?
I guess I'll sit here because it's convenient to sit here.
Okay, it's still on.
It's still on, all right. I'm not ambidextrous like you. I can't take movies and stills at the same time, so we'll have to forego the stills part.
Okay.
Boy, you've got a lot of stuff. Don't forget your how to read a poem here.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
You wouldn't want to miss the next installment of that.
Might be very important.
That's right.
Okay, I am reading 2 poems tonight, and actually both of them I've just discovered recently. I may have heard them somewhere a long time ago and forgotten. Don't think so. I believe I would have remembered them. I will, by way of introduction, point out that I was introduced to the first, or the longest. One of them is medium length poem, not very long, but the other one is quite short. The author, or the composer of the poems, however, I have heard of. I remember hearing about him in school, as a matter of fact, in grade school, before we got into high school. We had one of our teachers mentioned him and one of his books called The Autocrat of the Breakfast Table. And the author was Oliver Wendell Holmes, Sr. I think at the time they just said Oliver Wendell Holmes. I don't know, maybe Junior maybe was not very well known at that time, perhaps, not sure. But I didn't know there was a Junior until much later. But just a couple of weeks ago, I attended a meeting at Ore City, Texas, of retired FFA advisors of Area 6, which is kind of the Northeast Texas corner of Northeast Texas. I'm not sure how many counties, at least 20, I think. And these are agriculture, in my day, vocational agriculture, modern day agricultural science teachers, and they are automatically, by definition, the ones who are advisors to the FFA chapters in the high schools in which they teach. Well, in attending this meeting, I was visiting with a friend of mine, one of the retired ag teachers, FFA advisors, named Richard Lee, who now lives in Mount Vernon, and I rode down there with him. Burke Bullock was actually the driver, who's a retired ag teacher here from Winnsboro, and he picked me up at the depot, and then we drove to Mount Vernon to pick up Richard Lee, who's a guy who's older than I am. Burke Bullock is younger than I am. Richard Lee is older than I am. And in the course of the drive down there, Richard mentioned that his mother had been insistent that her children learn, read, and recite poetry. And they memorized a lot of poetry through their mother, not in school. Although the mother was a teacher, this was something that she did on her own time at home. And one of the poems that Richard remembered vividly was by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., and the title of it is The Last Leaf. And he proceeded to recite it, all the words, as we went down there to Ore City. And I never heard the poem, or if I had, I didn't remember it. And he told me that his sister also, all of the children were kind of required, apparently, to memorize poetry and to recite it at home. And he told me that his sister had written him a letter September 2017, so it's a recent letter from his sister, whose name is Elizabeth L. Gill, at Mount Bellevue, Texas. And this is the envelope in which the letter came. It's really, instead of a normal letter, this is I would call this a memoir, a short, very short, 2 and a third page memoir. I'm not going to read it all or anything, but when he said that it was a letter, I thought it would be, Dear Richard, and talking about their days, remembering learning poetry at their mother's knee and reciting and that sort of thing. It's actually a little essay that Elizabeth Gill, Richard's sister, had written, titled it The Last Leaf. And it actually says published in September 2017, Hometown Journey. I don't know, Hometown Journey must be either some sort of a periodical, or perhaps maybe a column that she writes for her local paper or something. It doesn't say what it is, but I'll just read the beginning of it. And she said, in this little essay, she says, "My mother taught us to memorize and recite poetry. Therefore, I can think of a poem about nearly anything you mention. My brother and I," this is Richard Lee, and probably my sister. So there's another sister in this family, unnamed here, says, can easily recite lines from The Last Leaf by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Now we're beginning to feel like the old man in the poem who has lost all of his old friends. And she goes on and talks about, as Richard did in our drive, about how important their mother considered it to read, memorize, and recite poetry in the home. And I was really impressed with that. You know, I think that would have been a very nice type of home to grow up in. And so she tells in here, really, mostly this is most of the regrets of the people that she did not ask questions of while they were still alive. And and I have a list, my own list of people that I wish that I had asked certain questions of, and now it's too late. And now there's no one that I can go to. This is an example. She says, I wish I could talk to Aunt Belle. She was the repository of the oral family history. She listened to Papa talk about his family, and she had much written history. The Mitchells were quite literate. And she goes on about how important he was in her life. And she closes by saying, yes, as last leaves on the tree, my brother and I would agree that we may be regarded as different from younger people, even comical in some of our beliefs and habits. We might say with the poem, let them smile as I do now, as the old forgotten bough where I cling. Now with that in mind as background, and Richard was, I just said to Richard, this letter you mentioned, is it possible that you would, I'm going to read this poem. I told him I'm going to read The Last Leaf at the next Live Poets Society meeting. And I said, I was wondering, is it possible that you would entrust me with the letter, as sort of background? And it turned out to be an essay rather than a letter, but he was happy to do it, even anxious to do it. And so now I'm going to read you the poem that is so very important in their lives, Richard, his sister Elizabeth, and their other unnamed sister, not to mention their mother, who was the emphasis for them learning and reciting poetry and it becoming so important in their life. I could tell from Richard's, from the tone of his reading, that this was still a very important thing for him when he would recite it totally from memory. So I'm going to read it now. The Last Leaf by Oliver Wendell Holmes, Sr. I saw him once before as he passed by the door, and again the pavement stones resound as he totters o'er the ground with his cane. They say that in his prime, ere the pruning knife of time cut him down, not a better man was found by the crier on his round through the town. But now he walks the streets and looks at all he meets, sad and wan, and he shakes his feeble head, that it seems as if he said, they are gone. The mossy marbles rest on the lips that he has pressed in their bloom, and the names he loved to hear have been carved for many a year on the tomb. My grandmama has said, poor old lady, she's dead long ago, that he had a Roman nose, and his cheek was like a rose in the snow. But now his nose is thin, and it rests upon his chin like a staff, and a crook is in his back, and a melancholy crack in his laugh. I know it is a sin for me to sit and grin at him here, but the old three-cornered hat and the breeches and all that are so queer. And if I should live to be the last leaf upon the tree in the spring. Let them smile as I do now at the old forsaken bough where I cling. And I had originally brought up the poem on my phone and had read it to myself several times since that time I was with Richard. And then I went on my desktop today and I brought up a website for Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. and it listed all of his poems. And there was one that caught my eye because as a person who has been a writer since from my actual memory, I would say at least since I think I became a serious writer sometime in the 4th grade, maybe earlier, and maybe I just don't remember it, I don't know. But I have strong memories of being really inspired to write in the 4th grade, and I've done it, ever since, and eventually became my profession. And I remember running across a phrase somewhere many years ago, a Latin phrase where it said furor scribendi, and it was spelled something like F-U-R-O-R, furor. Scribendi was S-C-R-I-B-E-N-D-I, and it was described, the translation of it was described as a rage for writing. And I adopted it as kind of my self-description because that kind of describes the way I've regarded writing since at least the 4th grade. And that meaning I was afflicted with a certain rage to write. And I didn't try to deal with it. I didn't try to suppress it or anything. I wrote a lot. And then in one of the poems by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. is titled, and the title is in Latin. I'm not going to pretend that I know how to pronounce it, but a guess at it would be Cacothes scribendi. Oh, I'll say this about Oliver Wendell Holmes. He was regarded as a brilliant doctor, medical doctor, who was also known for witty lectures at Harvard. And those witty lectures, I think, was what became the basis for his book, Autocrat of the Breakfast Table. I Googled this term, Cacothes scribendi, or whatever the pronunciation is, and I think this is where that term that I ran across years ago called furor scribendi probably originated with this poem, which and I just put it into Google and said translate to English from the Latin, and it said insatiable desire to write. So again, that sounds to me like a rage for writing. So I think they're one and the same. And this is a very short poem, but since it is so important to me in terms of, I'd already adopted furor scribendi as a description of myself for most of my life. I'm now adopting. You just punch this red thing. It's when the red thing starts blinking again. It's
blinking again. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to read Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr.'s poem, pronounced something like Cacothes scribendi. It's Latin, translates to insatiable desire to write. And it's a short one, but very meaningful. If all the trees and all the woods were men, and each and every blade of grass a pen, if every leaf on every shrub and tree turned to a sheet of foolscap, every sea were changed to ink, and all earth's living tribes had nothing else to do but act as scribes, and for 10,000 ages, day and night, the human race should write and write and write, till all the pens and paper were used up, and the huge inkstand was an empty cup. Still would the scribblers, clustered round its brink, call for more pens, more paper, and more ink. I do love it. I'm not sure it's as applicable today to the entire population as it probably was in the time of Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., whose life pretty much took place within the 1800s. And I think that was still probably true through much of the 1900s. But I'm not, I think somewhere in the latter part of the 1900s, and certainly for some portion of the, if not all, of the 21st century, that might be an optimistic view of the human race as a whole. I think there are a lot of people, it still describes a substantial number of people, but not nearly as great a population, as a percentage of the population as it did when he wrote that poem. So we're ready to go now with our, as we traditionally close, with a paragraph from How to Read a Poem and Fall in Love with Poetry by Edward Hirsch. This is one of, as paragraphs in this book go, this is a fairly long. It's about the same length as this second poem that I read. And all of it has, let's see, it starts off, a great deal of this paragraph has quote marks around it, so he's still quoting from something that we were talking about last time on reading the poem, or the paragraph from page 38. We're now on page 39. First paragraph on that page is, quote, "There are cemeteries that are lonely, graves full of bones that do not make a sound," Nuerda asserts, thus beginning almost gothically by establishing the backdrop of the poem, but also projecting a human feeling, loneliness, into the graveyards. The cemeteries are lonely because they make us feel lonely, because the poet is overwhelmed by loneliness when he thinks of human beings reduced to silent piles of bones. The journey toward death, dying itself, is a necessarily inward experience. Like a shipwreck, we die going into ourselves. But once death takes over, the subjects, and we're all subjects, turn into objects. There is an enormous abyss between subject and object. And there's, quoting again, and there are corpses, feet made of cold and sticky clay. These in turn become part of what the poet envisions as the great procession of the dead. Quote, "Sometimes I see alone coffins under sail that will include everyone from the most romantically inclined, parentheses, pensive young girls, parentheses, to their pragmatic, commonsensical husbands, parentheses, notary publics, close parentheses." And that's it. Until next time, the Live Poet Society is grateful to Conrad Wolfman for hosting us in the Winnsboro Emporium here at 212 Main, Market Street. It used to be on Main Street. We're now on Market Street. Historic Market Street, also known as the Bowery. And we're just hoping that Conrad is able to keep this business going at least for a long time, hopefully forever. We wish him well. We think it's Winnsboro's treasure, unique store, I understand there are no degrees of uniqueness, so I won't say very unique or most unique. It is just unique. Unique is a great term, one that very few people or objects or places earn that designation. I say without any thought of contradiction by any credible source that the Winnsboro Emporium is indeed, as is Conrad himself, unique. And that's it for this time. Thank you again.
You're very welcome. There you go, you may turn yourself off.